Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 27 of Buha's Block. Today, I am pleased to be joined by Anthony Irwin, Lakers insider for Lakers Daily and the host of the Lakers Lounge podcast. He also has a YouTube channel. I recommend you check it out. I've done his show multiple times, so it's only right I have him on here. Anthony, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. I'm legitimately greatly honored. I had Dan on the show yesterday, and I told him, what have you done for me lately? Okay, now Dan is my favorite beat reporter, but now that I'm on your show, you get that title back. You're now my favorite beat reporter again. No, I'm doing great, man. Thanks very much for having me on.
This is a weird time period right now because I've been struggling with like what to talk. Like obviously the
Yeah.
Lakers coaching search is the primary thing right now, but we're about 3.5 weeks out from the draft. We're about a month out from free agency. There are rumblings of different things that start to percolate around now, but like we're not really at that time yet. Still, a lot of guys have to decide on their player options. You got team options, restricted free agents, stuff that's going to happen around the draft. So like a lot of the player movement stuff is those conversations are ongoing, but we're not yet at a point where things are really materializing yet. I guess the thing right now that everyone's talking about, of course, is the coaching search. And JJ Redick, by all accounts, is the front runner right now. But the Lakers are claiming that this is a thorough process and they've taken their time. It's been almost a month since Darvin Ham was let go. I believe it was May 3rd. So we're May 31st, 28 days later, exactly 4 weeks ago. So what is the latest that you've heard on the coaching search? And what are your thoughts overall on how the last few weeks have gone?
I'm glad you used that word claiming. That it's been a thorough search. Like well, I don't want to go so far as to say that it's a charade because I do legitimately think that I do think that they really like James Borrego. I do think that they really like, Sam Cassell has a really noteworthy resume, and there are other potential coaches out there who, would be fascinating in most kind of situations. The thing for me is, and you and Shams reported this for The Athletic, they compared JJ Redick to they see him as a potential Pat Riley. And once you go there, once you compare him to legend and icon, especially Lakers legend and Lakers icon Pat Riley, and you don't hire that guy, it's kind of tough, right? It's like we thought he was Pat Riley, but we really like James Borrego. So I keep on hearing that Redick is probably going to be the guy. I keep on hearing that there's some of this has to do with the ESPN situation and him calling the finals. And so essentially what I've kind of heard is that the Lakers are basically taking this opportunity while they wait for Redick to fulfill his contractual obligations to ESPN. They're using that opportunity to do more digging, and they're basically not sitting on their hands waiting for Redick. And that means interviewing Borrego more thoroughly. And that means talking to some of these other candidates more thoroughly. What comes of those conversations, and if some of those conversations are about potentially coming on to JJ Redick's staff, that remains to be seen. But as it stands right now, I'd still be pretty shocked if it wasn't Redick.
Yeah. Basically all similar stuff to what I've heard. I think Borrego, it seems like, is the number two in this process, where if there was somehow an upset and JJ doesn't get it, or the situation falls through for whatever reason, we have seen that before with the Lakers in terms
James
of
Borrego, like he's
well, yeah. So like until it's official, right? We can hear things and things can seem like they're trending a certain way, but until it's officially official, it seems like Borrego is the number two, and that if the Lakers do go ahead with JJ Redick as the head coach, that they would love James Borrego to be on that staff, potentially as either the associate head coach or as the lead assistant. And he has the backing of Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis and him have a good rapport from what I've been told. It is kind of funny because they only overlapped in New Orleans for like a
The 1
month,
year.
month and a
Yeah.
half. It wasn't even
Yeah.
like a full, like half a season or whatever. It was like literally Anthony Davis gets drafted, they overlap a bit, and then James Borrego leaves New Orleans, goes to Orlando, where he joins Jacques Vaughn's staff, and then he eventually becomes the interim there. But I guess that month and a half left a really strong impression on AD, and
Yeah.
those two have kept in communication and have a really good rapport. And as we know, the Lakers are factoring in Anthony Davis and just thinking about like this isn't just a hire for the next year or two of LeBron and AD. It's a hire for theoretically the rest of the decade. And who's
Yeah.
the type, who's the coach that's going to be the best for the rest of the 2020s, and who's going to be the best option for the next era of Lakers basketball. So this is all stuff that the Lakers are weighing right now, but all indications continue to point toward JJ Redick. That's been the case for several weeks now, excuse me, really since the beginning of the process that
Yeah.
all the JJ buzz started around then. So recently there was some reports on the assistant coaching options that are being floated around. And shout out to Dan Wojcicki of the LA Times for really breaking that down in terms of, so some of the names include, Cassell and Borrego, of course, those have been the top three for the Lakers. So if the Lakers don't hire those two, they would love to have them on JJ's staff, but also Scott Brooks, Rajon Rondo, Jared Dudley. Those are some of the names that are floating around right now. Interestingly, several of those guys have ties to JJ. So I mentioned AD having a month and a half with Borrego. Borrego and JJ spent half a season together in Orlando. He was with Sam Cassell for 3 years with the Clippers. He and Jared Dudley were together with the Clippers for a year. And then there's no clear Scott Brooks tie-in. There's no clear Rondo tie-in other than Boston and Orlando having some iconic battles through like the late 2000s, early 2010s. But
I saw Rondo
with
did a show too.
yeah,
Rondo just
and
did
Rondo
a
did a
Redick show
show.
as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with all those names, hearing that it is several guys who have either been head coaches or have been rumored and been interviewing to be head coaches, does if we're going with the assumption that the Lakers are going to hire JJ, and then you hear some of these stronger names for assistant coaching options, does that give you more confidence in the Lakers building out this staff and how this all could work? Or how do you view the names that have been out there and the potential fit with JJ?
Yeah, it's kind of tough because the number one thing that they need to provide JJ is pretty clearly experience. He needs former head coaches there. And I thought that was something that Darvin really lacked last year was, when he was kind of mix matching rotations and lineups and all of these things, he could have used a former head coach to step in and say like, hey, these guys are creatures of habit. They need to know on a nightly basis when they're going into the game, if they're starting, where their shots are going to come from. They need to know where they're practicing or what they should be focusing on in their practice, because the Lakers don't practice very much. And so in their individual workouts, they need to be able to identify those things so that they can figure that out on the fly. And and just like the way that Darvin, I thought, didn't necessarily communicate in a way that would have indicated that a former head coach was in his ear, just saying like, hey, you need to talk to these guys more than you are. And whoever the Lakers hire, and again, I'd be pretty surprised if it was anybody else other than Redick. If it is, no matter who it is, though, like if it's Redick, Borrego was only a head coach once. Stotts has more experience, though I haven't really seen him interviewed for the head coaching gig or considered a candidate for the head coaching gig per se. Cassell has not been a head coach before. Before it was Adelman and Nori, who else, who the Lakers may have also considered. No matter who the Lakers hire here, other than maybe Scott Brooks, they're going to need to supply that head coach with a bunch of experience. And that's where I think this group of names is kind of lacking, to be completely honest, where Borrego is has the most experience, and he's going to be JJ's potential number 2. Brooks really does provide that, and he is somebody who's communicated really, really well with players in the past. So that would be nice. But Rondo, Dudley, Cassell has plenty of experience as an assistant coach. I would like maybe one more, especially defensive-minded head coach or former head coach to step in there and really provide JJ the kind of experience that he isn't. It's not just that JJ doesn't have head coaching experience; he doesn't have coaching experience, and that's a big box that he needs checked. And I think this list, as it stands right now, could probably use another name or two with more experience attached to it.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that James Borrego is reportedly one of the 2 leading candidates for the Cleveland Cavaliers position. So that could be a potential holdup as well, because there's been a lot of reporting on JJ assembling this staff. But as we know, that's par for the course when you are discussing a potential opening with a coach, is who is going to be on your staff. And JJ not necessarily coming from a coaching tree and having experience with other coaches in terms of coaching alongside them. He's basically creating his coaching lineage from scratch. And of course, the Lakers are going to have some input on that as well. I think they are going to, you saw with Frank Vogel, there was a lot of input in terms of Jason Kidd being on the staff and certain guys and the way that they structured that. And then with Darvin Ham, it seemed to be much more his input and guys that he had previously coached with.
Unless you were Rasheed Wallace.
Unless you're Rasheed Wallace. Not a lot of head coaching experience. The one thing that sticks out to me with this is, well, one, I don't think it's going to be all these guys, right? Like, these are right now some of the options, and I'm sure there'll be like another name or 2 that pops up. And I don't see it being, because already we just named 5 guys. I don't think they're going to have, most staffs have like 4 to 5 primary assistants. But 2, I think you want to be careful as you build out this staff insofar as, like, you don't want to put too many guys who want to be head coach on the staff. Like, you probably want 2 of those guys in terms of guys who are angling to be, and we don't know, like, Rondo seems like he is destined to be a head coach at some point. He's obviously dealt with some off-court troubles, let's say, that have prevented that. And I think if not for that, he probably would have been in the mix for this job in terms of being the head coach of the Lakers. But
I've been
Rondo
told
aside,
he was getting ready to interview back in 2020 when they hired Darvin Ham, that he was getting ready to interview in 2020, and then you got the TMZ report, and then all of a sudden that interview did not happen.
You mean 2022?
Oh yeah. I'm
okay.
old, but when they hired Darvin, in 2022, that he was one of the names that they were considering, and they were going to bring him in for an interview. And then we got the report of a now since dismissed case, and this is why he's now being considered again. But that interview just kind of fell by the wayside once that then open case came up.
And then I believe there were firearm charges relatively recently.
Just recently, in January.
So that was factor 2. But hey, look, for Laker fans clamoring for them to go back to the 2020 model, you bring back Rondo, you bring back Jared Dudley, like getting there, maybe not in the same way, but
getting the band back together.
Like Jared Dudley, like, to me, would almost be filling that Phil Handy role of sort of a coach player liaison. And that's not to minimize, like, Phil did, one of the best player development coaches in the league, one of the more beloved assistants in the league. But a big factor with Phil was just his ability to, like, great relationship with the players, and then also being able to translate that and sort of mediate at times between the players and the coaching staff. So I could see Jared Dudley having a similar role, just with his prior relationships with LeBron and Anthony Davis and his experience with the organization. So Rondo, Dudley, like, I think those 2 guys are appealing additions to the staff. And then Borrego, Cassell, Brooks, I think, again, probably 2 of those 3 rather than all 3. And defensively, I think they could use more of a defensive coordinator haven't heard any name. Like I know we talked about on your show Stan Van Gundy as just like theorizing.
You
A
put
name
that idea in my head, and I haven't been able to get rid of it.
I
It's a
think it'd be
great
interesting.
idea.
Now,
Yeah.
he's obviously he coached JJ in Orlando, and now he's doing TV for TNT and Turner. But that only has a year left, seems like. So maybe he takes that opportunity if JJ, and we still don't really know the level of input JJ is going to have on the staff, but seems to be like things are quieting down for now. I would be surprised if there was an announcement today. And if there's not an announcement today, well, by Thursday, the finals are starting. And at that point, it seems like the Lakers won't be officially announcing their next head coach until the finals.
Yeah.
JJ Redick is calling the finals. There's an opportunity to have a moment there. If you announce him, you could do a whole thing on the broadcast. Then he officially joins after the finals. And then you have about a 1 week runway to the draft. So like some of these things seem to be in motion. Things could, I mean, who knows? He could be announced in like a few hours, but I mean, that would spoil this part of the podcast. Too, like I'd be pretty surprised if that ends up happening.
Yeah, the Lakers, like we know that they are willing to partner with the league and partner with the league's partners, right? That's why they hoisted that in-season tournament flag and really kind of annoyed some hardcore fans.
Flag.
Because
I like calling it a flag and not a banner.
yeah, it's it's a piece of cloth, it's a towel. But like they that they're willing to compromise on those things. And I think if the league, if Adam Silver says, hey, we would like the focus of these finals to be the finals, or if ESPN says, can we hold off so that because it's a great look for ESPN, by the way. If they, we've already seen it with Mark Jackson, where a rookie to be head coach gets announced in the middle of the finals. That looks great for ESPN. Doc Rivers goes from ESPN's booth to Milwaukee and coaches at that time the top team in the conference. So for ESPN, they probably really want that moment almost as much as the Lakers to kind of pat JJ on the back and say, congratulations, best of luck here after this series or whatever. Now back to the action. I could see that. That seems to me the most likely scenario, if not when JJ Redick gets announced.
Yeah, that seems to be the way that this is all trending. But after that, so let's say coaching next 2-3. I mean, it's got to be within the next 3 weeks, but next 2 to 3 weeks, it gets announced, and then he officially joins after the finals. The Lakers have some important decisions to make.
Yeah.
I would argue that how they build out the roster and the roster that they provide this next head coach is just as, if not more important than the actual coach, and trying to figure out how to both try to win now and go all in with your assets to build out a championship contender for the 2024-25 season and potentially the 25-26 season, depending on what type of contract LeBron James agrees to. And this is all assuming LeBron James stays in LA, but all signs are pointing to that being the case.
Safe assumption.
Yeah. So let's say, 2-year window with LeBron and AD to try and win another championship. Then you're also balancing, what does the rest of the decade look like? And are we, if we're trading 3 picks this offseason, like how are we recouping those assets once LeBron leaves? You will, depending on how you structure your salary sheet, you will have some flexibility, obviously, if LeBron retires and that figure isn't on your books anymore. But at that point, we've seen the way that free agency works has shifted, especially with stars, in terms of guys will just take the guaranteed money, they will extend, they will re-sign, and then they will ask out 6 months later, a year later, year and a half later, whatever. So you're not seeing stars move in the same way as they traditionally have in terms of free agency. So I say all this to say, with the Lakers being a month out and with the acknowledgement that a lot can change, I'm sure the head coach will have some input on how the roster is built. The market, we don't know which Cleveland guard is going to be available, if any. We don't know which Atlanta guard is going to be available, if any. If not both. There
Yeah.
could be another star that pops up. The Brandon Ingram seems to be out there. But just looking at the market as it is right now and the intel that you have right now, which way do you think the Lakers are leaning in terms of their roster building path? What's realistic, and how could this all change within the next few weeks if we're trying to kind of project this out?
It's tough. Right when the season ended, I would have said they're going to go all in for either Trae Young or Donovan Mitchell. All year, frankly, dating back to even before the deadline, I'd been hearing that the player that they had more confidence in their ability to potentially go out and get was Donovan Mitchell, even above Trae Young. And then since then, you've had Trae Young leave clutch, which we'd be remiss to ignore that factor here. So,
Big factor.
I since then, in the weeks since the season ended, a lot of momentum has gained behind the use the picks, use the contracts to upgrade one-way guys like Rui, like Jared, like even D'Angelo Russell, players who make most of their impact on one side of the ball, and see if you can use their contracts to go out and get two-way help. And see if you can use that draft capital to get two-way help. I would be pretty surprised. Like if I set the over under at 2.5 first round picks that they use, I legitimately don't know which side of that I would sit on. I want
I
to
might
say
even
that
lean toward 2, like 2
yeah.
probably being this safer bet than 3. But
Yeah, well, that's what they normally do. And Palinka usually says that he likes to keep one pick, one powder, one chunk of his powder dry, so that at the deadline they can make whatever additions that they have to. So I could probably see them going with 2, but what type of two-way player can you realistically get with only 2 picks? Is it Kuz? Do you want to use 2 picks on Kuz? Is it Mikal Bridges? The Brooklyn Nets keep on telling everybody that they have turned down offers of 4 picks for that guy.
it's gonna be more than 2 picks for him.
Yeah, even if they go the depth and kind of more prudent and conservative route, you're still going to have to push all in. And Rob, even the year that they brought in Russell Westbrook, wasn't willing to go all in because he didn't want to pay, or the Lakers didn't feel like they needed to pay Alex Caruso the luxury tax money that it would have cost to keep him. So history would indicate that they're probably going to be kind of conservative here. And Dan said on the show yesterday that he could see them reutilizing the continuity talking points that they used at last year's media day this year. And I don't know how fans would handle that. I
don't
could
think it would
see
go
the,
over
the
well.
angle on it, but I don't know how people would feel about that.
And this is going to kind of spoil. So after we got one more topic, and then
Mhm.
we're going to go into some mailbag questions. So I don't want to spoil it too much, but I guess going to kind of step on it a little bit. Of like, I think if you're the Lakers and you don't use at least 2 of those 3 picks to upgrade the roster, be it in the form of a third star, although I think that would probably require 3 picks, depending on who the guys. But I think about like Trae, Donovan. I'd be shocked if they didn't go for at least 3 firsts. Darius Garland, DeJounte Murray. I mean, Darius, given how young he is, and like he's probably 3 at least. And then DeJounte, I think 2 seems fairer to me than 3, but like now we're getting into the weeds with that. But like 2 or 3 minimum for a third star. And then
Yeah.
and
And
Lakers
Reeves.
also it's
Like,
well, and Reeves, and it's
yeah.
also worth noting that the Lakers, I believe, have 2 or 3 pick swaps that they can add in, because you could do pick swaps on the opposite years that you're not trading the picks. But so you could throw in a couple pick swaps to sweeten the deal, depending on who it is. But yeah, it's going to cost you Austin Reeves, most likely. It's going to cost you 2 to 3 picks. It's going to cost you Rui. I would Rui or Vando, depending on how much money that player is making. You got a salary match. It might cost you JHS on top of it, and you're basically going all in for a third star. Otherwise, you
Sorry,
can
Raj.
split those assets and probably keep Austin out of it and say, we're willing to attach a pick or two to Rui, a pick or two to D'Lo if he opts in, a pick or two to Vando or Gabe, and like you can upgrade the roster that way. But if they don't use at least a couple picks, in my opinion, that is there's really no way to positively spin that into like we are actually trying here with the LeBron AD era. And because I go back to, I just wrote about it, but you go back to the trade deadline, and there was the framing at the time from Rob Pelinka was we had one pick. I think he used a fishing analogy of like, we had one pick to hook with, and come June, come the June 26th draft, we will have three picks to hook with, and we could bring in a bigger fish, a bigger swing. So like that doesn't, I mean, that to me, reading the room, like seemed to indicate that was the 3-star path that they were weighing at the time. I think they're still going to explore that path, but it is going to be looking at the league right now, you can make a case there's as many as like 24, 25, even 26 teams trying to go for it next season in terms of being competitive, making the play-in. In the East, you got to win like 35 games. In the West, you have Memphis is going to be healthy. Houston just missed the cusp and was right there. Played
Utah's
as well as almost
better.
anybody in the last like third of the season. San Antonio could take a big jump with Wemby. So like the West is brutal. The East, the threshold's low. So you have all these teams going for it, and like prices are going to be high. And we both reported on some of these deadline prices to 2024 deadline, and it was like Dorian Finney-Smith, Alex Caruso, like these teams are turning down 2 first-round picks for these guys, and it like that. It just seems crazy, but like that was the market at that time, and like just kind of reading the league right now feels like it could be a pretty similar market in terms of the astronomical prices for role players, and maybe some star guys that we think are going to move just don't even end up moving. So, but I say all of that with like the context of if the Lakers just run this back, I don't see how you can make the argument that this is a championship caliber team. Like I think there were clearly some holes with this group, and who knows, maybe there's an like an alternate universe where they get OKC in round 1, or they get Minnesota in round 1, and they upset one of those teams, and they make the second round or the conference finals, and then they would still lose to Denver if they played Denver. But who knows? Maybe Denver gets knocked out. But like we can theorize all that, but I still think like this group had some flaws. This group, particularly the shot making in the playoffs, but obviously the defense as well. So I think there's no real, like, you can point to certain things in season tournament, the record with Rui, playing Denver close again. Like there are some positives, and the LeBron and AD both making All-NBA, All-Stars, all that stuff. But like, you got to do something. I just don't see how you can run this back. And I think the Lakers are aware of that. Now, how aggressive they are and how much they're actually willing to use those picks and their assets, that remains to be seen. And I guess we'll have a better idea in early July. But like, I don't see how you can make a credible case that you are actually going for it if you just run this back. Like that to me is ludicrous.
There is none. There's no case. There's, the spin. And again, I would be pretty surprised if they didn't use their picks because of the stuff that we're talking about here. But like the case that they would try to make is, we think whoever we hire as a head coach is actually going to play our best players next year. We're going to get more from Vincent than we did last year. We're going to get more from Jared Vanderbilt this year than we did last year. Maybe Austin steps up. He gets a little stronger. He's a better defender. And like, there are points to be made, and I could see them trying to make those points. But I also think, like, I've been doing this a little while, and I grew up a Laker fan anyway. It's actually an underratedly smart fan base. We know what a good team looks like. We know what a championship mentality looks like, and championship execution looks like. It's been maddening to watch these playoffs here. There is no juggernaut. And the idea that at the deadline, during a season where LeBron James and Anthony Davis were both top 10 to 15 players, literally, like according to the awards, 10 to 15 players. And I'd be willing to hear somebody out, and if they wanted to say that LeBron was a top 10 player, to basically sit out that deadline in a year where it's that wide open and say that, well, the whole reason that we're doing that is to keep our powder dry to be able to go and do something big the upcoming summer. And then if you don't do something big in that upcoming summer, it just the logic doesn't track. So I do think that they'll wind up doing something. I do think if I set the over under at 2.5 first round picks, I would still come in at the under, but they would have to use those 2 picks. They would have to do something. They need to upgrade their backup center situation. You can't have everything fall to hell when AD sits down for like 5 minutes. They need to upgrade their perimeter defense, where you need a better point of attack defender between Austin and D'Lo. I'm really curious what you've heard on the D'Lo front, because I was talking to Dan last night. I have never seen such a broad spectrum on what a player's offseason looks like, where I've heard anywhere from he's going to opt in because there isn't a market to he's going to opt out, and he could get upwards of like 375 from 3 years at for 475 from like Orlando. That's a giant gap in what a player's offseason in summer might look like. But if he opts in, and you have those 3 picks, and you have, Jared Vanderbilt's a little overpaid, you have Vincent with 1 fewer year on his contract, you have Jalen Hood-Schifino, who didn't do anything for you as a rookie, but is still seen as like a viable prospect here moving forward. Yeah, I'd be pretty shocked if this was the roster that they run out there next year. It would be such, like, you'd see the big dumb protest at Staples Center like you saw a few years ago.
Well, the one potential issue, though, that's kind of out of their control, though they can semi-control it by executing a trade, is so you have 8 guys under contract entering next season officially. And then let's say LeBron either opts in or opts out and resigns. D'Lo hypothetically opts in. You could have Jackson Hayes and Cam Reddish both opt in. And then if you match or just re-sign Max Christie, that brings you to 13 guys. And that's before factoring in the potential use of the number 17 or number 55 pick. That also doesn't factor in potentially buying a pick or trading for a pick to use on Bronny potentially. And that doesn't factor in Taurean Prince is going to be a free agent. So like, and the Lakers would theoretically have this non-taxpayer or taxpayer MLE that they could use, be it on Prince or someone else. So like that, you're pushing to 15 guys. And even if they draft, let's say they just use the 2029 and 2031 picks, and you take someone at 17, you take someone at 55, like now all of a sudden you're pushing past the 15 guys, and that's fine in the off season, and you can figure that out as the summer progresses. But like, it's kind of out of their control to some extent, given these 1+1 deals that they signed Christian Wood, Cam Reddish, and Jackson Hayes to, because I think if they had their choice, I don't think Christian Wood and Cam Reddish would be back next season.
Yeah.
I think Jackson Hayes would be back because he had a pretty solid second half of the year.
He's the one who's probably going to opt out.
But he's the one that's probably going to opt out. So like they're in this kind of tough position now. I wonder with Cam, like I've heard he's more likely to opt in, but I do think his role, like without the maybe the I'm trying to think of like the blessing of Darvin. I don't know where, like, I think if the Lakers keep Max Christie, he will, the next coach will play Max Christie ahead of Cam Reddish, which should have been the case last year. Then you'll also have Austin and Vando, Rui, LeBron, potentially another wing if they trade for one or use an exception on that player. So like, I don't see where he fits in the rotation. So if he's really trying to carve out a role at the NBA level, it might be better to opt out and try and find a spot where he could be like a 9th or 10th guy. And but I don't know where that is. I don't know what that market is. So maybe he just opts in and Lakers try and flip him or include him with one of the deals that they try and make. But before we get to our mailbag,
I could see
quickly,
that happen.
go ahead.
The camp one. I don't think the blessing of Darvin Ham is a phrase that has been on a Lakers podcast ever. So that's unique.
Well, yeah.
Congratulations on that one. And then two, the Cam thing is tough because teams are always going to gamble on pedigree. And you look at Cam and he looks like
I think he'd get another chance somewhere.
Yeah.
Like they send the November tape, and
he was fine.
Not any of the other tape.
He was fine, and then he realized, oh shoot, I need to get another contract, and I'm going to start shooting again. And then he was less fine. So, I tend to think that he'll give it one more go, and I think he'll maybe get one more opportunity. But also, if he opts in and Clutch basically goes to the Lakers and says, "Hey, this guy's opting in," but if you happen to send him to a team that has fewer wings, we'd really appreciate it, and I could see that possibly happening there too.
So speaking of Darvin Ham, he was in the news recently. Per the Athletics' Anthony Slater, the Warriors and Ham had some conversations about Ham potentially joining Steve Kerr's staff, and it seems like it's not going anywhere. And it's also kind of a factor here is Kenny Atkinson. As I mentioned, James Borrego for the Cleveland job, but Kenny Atkinson is the other name that is being considered. Conversations I've had, I've heard it seems like Atkinson is slightly ahead of Borrego and seems to be the front runner there in Cleveland. So if Kenny Atkinson is gone now, that's another former head coach. Like Golden State's kind of cycled through several guys for they've had several guys picked off their staff. Mike Brown, Gentry, Luke Walton, and now potentially Atkinson. And I think Willie Green, like this. So they've had like Golden State seems to be the best place to be an assistant. Like you go there and you kind of rehab your value, and you get the Steve Kerr sheen on your reputation, and all of a sudden
like NBA Nick Saban.
Yeah, like you become this hot commodity. So I think clearly like Darvin Ham is going to be if he wants to continue coaching, which all signs point to that being the case, he's going to have to take an assistant job. I think rehab his value, then potentially interview for the upcoming next coaching cycle. So with all that, what do you think of that potential fit with Darvin Ham and Golden State, and what do you think of Darvin Ham as an assistant next season, and sort of maybe that being a better fit for him, and sort of the way that he can rehab his value?
I think generally speaking, he's a very good assistant coach. Right? Even when he was interviewing, when he was a name who came up for the Lakers, you would ask people around the league, and nobody had anything all that bad to say about Darvin Ham, the assistant coach. There were people that I spoke to who had concern about his organization skills as a head coach. Would he be able to translate some of those things? What would his staff look like? And how could he be kind of aided? Because he's a great communicator. Players love him. And with the Warriors specifically, he and Draymond Green are from the same neighborhood. And obviously Draymond has some issues flying off the handle occasionally. And basically if Steve Kerr tells Darvin, who's a big guy, who's a big authoritative guy too, hey, just make sure Draymond doesn't do Draymond stuff. Could you just make sure he doesn't just make sure he doesn't get suspended, please? I could actually see Darvin being great there. I wasn't surprised at all to find out that they brought him in. I also wasn't necessarily surprised to find out that they didn't hire him, though, because the person that he'd be replacing, Kenny Atkinson, is an X's and O's guy, and Darvin Ham is very much not an X's and O's guy. He had Chris Gent on his staff, handle the offense and stuff like that last year. And, if you kind of think of what a perfect coach would look like, the balance of X's and O's and communication, that combination was Mike Budenholzer and Darvin Ham. They were really perfect for each other because you had Budenholzer who operated at this really high X's and O's level, and you had Darvin Ham to kind of translate and communicate that message out to the players, and it kind of flowed that way. And I thought Bud missed Darvin when he didn't have Darvin, and I thought Darvin missed Bud when he didn't have Bud. And I don't necessarily see Kerr as like that Bud type of coach. He's more of the CEO type. He's kind of actually a version of what Redick, I think, is going to function of, if Redick is the head coach. But I think wherever Darvin winds up, one, he's a very popular guy around the league, so it's going to happen sooner rather than later. I don't think it'll happen this year. I think he would kind of like to take a year off, but if it does happen, it will be the kind of spot where he just gets to focus on the things that made him really popular in the first place, which is player communication, understanding the people aspect of things. And it was really surprising that he lost that his second year. It was really kind of fascinating to see him lack in that area when that was supposed to be his strong suit.
I hadn't thought of the Draymond angle with Golden State, and that I guess was obvious, but it kind of went over my
I'm
head.
giving
But
Dan credit for that. He mentioned it yesterday on the show. So Dan,
okay, so that would be a good. I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
So we'll see. And Kenny Atkinson's still on staff, so they don't have that void on the staff yet. But if that is created, I think it is like the assistant coaching rehab program is up there in Golden State, where you get a certain perception boost, I would say. But let's quickly do some mailbag questions, and we'll keep these to like 30 seconds to a minute. First one from friend of the show, Rich Staples, at Rich Staples. What feasible financial options are at the Lakers' disposal for acquiring a reasonable quality big?
Well, they're probably only going to have the one exception. They used their biannual last year. And then after that, it's vet min type players. So I actually think it's more likely they trade for a big, using, say, Gabe's salary. Because I think bigs in the NBA are difficult to kind of value, because clearly you need a better big than a veteran minimum type player. The Lakers really struck gold with Dwight Howard, and he was only available because his reputation around the league was just in the absolute gutter. And then he came in and he focused on all the right things, and he like vastly outperformed his vet min contract that 1 year. And they have basically thought ever since that they could just replicate that kind of a situation. They tried it with Marc Gasol. He got sick. That didn't work out. I think even Andre Drummond is making more than the veterans minimum. So I could see them using Gabe's contract a few seconds and trying to go out there and get a big who is somewhere in between Christian Wood and Anthony Davis. It's actually kind of funny. Last year, I don't think they thought Wood was going to be available at the minimum when they signed Jackson Hayes. And I always kind of wondered, if they had known that, would they have made the Jackson Hayes signing? It's ironic that Hayes wound up being the better player and had the better season, but the way that all played out was really funny.
Yeah, I hammered that. I got some pushback from the team on the whole Hayes. Like, I was not a fan of the Hayes Wood combo.
It was
from the
it was a
jump.
day one signing.
Well, more so what, like, once that became, because to me it was like you needed a more defensive minded guy, and once you went and obviously they have different offensive skills, so I could see the kid, like, you could make the argument that they are. I mean, they're different players. They're not exactly the same type of guy, but to me it was like you need a plus. Like, if you're going to like the double backup center route, you need a plus defender, between the two. And like Jackson Hayes kind of profiles as it could, because of his athleticism and his length, and he'll block a shot into the second row. Like, you might view him that way, but as like that's not the Jackson Hayes reality. So the fact that they went that direction, I was like, okay, you need a defensive minded big with your second spot. And then the fact that they went with Christian Wood, who in my opinion actually, like, I would say exceeded expectations defensively, and underperformed offensively, which was kind of interesting with how his season went. But so I mean, as you said, non-taxpayer MLE, taxpayer MLE, those are the two financial options for Lakers outside of making a trade. Looking at, I have a list here of some big options that I mentioned last week on the pod. Andre Drummond, Jonas Valanciunas, Daniel Tice, Xavier Tillman, and that's it. So it's like,
yeah,
and that like,
the free agent
I
class
see
this year is rough.
it's a really bad class. So none of those names are like Valanciunas we saw against the Lakers got played off the floor, and there are some defensive concerns with him. Drummond, I think, is fine, solid as a backup center. Doesn't have the best mobility. I think his mobility is decreased. Not really much of a rim protector, but like a big body, really good defensive rebounder. So at least from that perspective, like I could almost see like a better version of Christian Wood, of some of what Christian Wood's strengths were. Daniel Tice, I like, though he's getting up there in age, and always seems to be dealing with some type of injury.
Yeah.
Also a bit undersized. And then Xavier Tillman, I like, though he's been okay in Boston. Hasn't really carved out. I guess he's had a consistent role, but part of that's been because Porzingis has been out. So none of those names are really moving the needle. But let's get to our next question from @GMachine99. Do you think the Lakers will finally commit to going all in for LeBron and AD, or will they go half in and save for the future? So this was the question I was alluding to earlier. I guess my quick read would just be, I feel like they go 70 to 80% in. I don't know. Like if we're betting on or trying to make an educated guess or assumption here, I would lean more toward like you mentioned the 2.5 picks. I would probably lean toward 2 more than 3, and leaning. So I guess that's like 70 to 80% in terms of, like, if you're going all in, you are trading you're trading all 3 picks. You're throwing in pick swaps. You're throwing in basically any tradable guy to upgrade the roster. I don't know if they go that aggressive with it, but I think that there will be some sort of middle option where they are, again, using a pick or 2, using a couple of the rotation guys, maybe using a pick swap, second round picks, like what have you. So I would lean more toward, I don't think they go like fully all in. That would surprise me, but I think there's kind of a 3/4 of the way there, and they sort of split the difference a little bit of like, we're going to try and retain some of our assets just for prudent planning down the road. Even though if you're in the LeBron business, I think you kind of got to go all in, right? And they've been hinting that they would, but I'm a little skeptical that they do.
I think another version of this question that becomes interesting is, if they don't go all in this summer, will they have been all in at the end of this season? So if
Like
they don't use that third pick, if they use 2 of the 3 picks this summer, will they use that third pick at the deadline? That's the part of this. That's all I care about. Is like, after this season, I would like to see all of the chips that the Lakers have in the middle of the table. Just try it once, and I understand that the backside of, or the other side of this LeBron era is really terrifying if you have nothing to build off of after you're done. But like, as we've seen from the last few years, the Lakers are actually pretty good at acquiring assets when the cachet is run dry, and or the cash, I don't know, but I would like, I would like to see them, make whatever upgrades that they have to this year. I'm actually fine with keeping powder dry going into the season. One of the things that I actually criticized them for last offseason was that if the season didn't go to plan, because they hard capped themselves, because they let Bamba and Beasley's contracts expire, they didn't have any real ways to viably upgrade the roster at the deadline. And I hope that they kind of learn from that mistake here and give themselves an out here and there, just in case that right deal comes along. Because again, as we've seen in these playoffs, if you give LeBron and AD one more decent rotation player, and you give him a coach, or if you give him and Anthony Davis a coach who, say, plays their best players, I would like to see what that season looks like, right? That's always going to be the what if, is we're always going to look back on this last season where LeBron and AD were both playing all NBA caliber basketball, and the Lakers basically decided that they were too mediocre to push another, shovel full of chips into the middle of the table. It wasn't just the first rounder that they didn't pick or that they didn't move. They didn't move they had like 5 or 6 second rounders that they could have moved. They had pick swaps that they could have moved. They had a Jalen Hood-Schifino prospect type player that they could have moved, and they sat it out. And I think that's a decision that is always going to kind of haunt me a little bit.
Well, and that to me is the one pushback to, like, I understand if you want to keep one of the firsts and maybe you keep, like, you're like, hey, we can play JHS and maybe build up some of his value in the regular season and show some of the progress that he made in the G League and see if we could translate that to an NBA level. And then all of a sudden you're rehabbing his value and maybe you could flip him closer to the deadline along with a pick and then some matching salary for some type of upgrade. The problem is if LeBron or AD goes out for an extended period of time, or just because the West is so treacherous and you sort of underachieve and maybe you're a 5, 6, 7 seed again in that mix, like then maybe you're not as all in at the deadline. And now you kind of have the excuse of, well, we're a 7 seed again. So like, is it really worth upgrading the roster and using this third pick to get, a better role player that, like, is that going to elevate us to like the 5 seed? Like, so I feel like, and that was kind of the direction they went a little bit last season, where I think if they were in a stronger position, you would have seen a more all-in push with the pick and with trying to upgrade the roster in terms of, via trade. So that's my one hesitation is, like, if you don't go all in now, you kind of give yourself an out to potentially, if things go wrong, you could kind of then point to, well, hey, like, we tried to go mainly in and we were saving this for the deadline, and then the season didn't go our way, and now we're gonna stand pat and not make another move. So, like, if they're willing to save those assets and, like, fully commit to, barring the season just being an all-out disaster, we're going to try and upgrade the roster at the deadline, that's one thing. But if it's sort of this, we're saying this, but like we're leaving ourselves out depending on how the season goes, like, that's where I get a little skittish with it, because I just think they've already shown that if they don't love a move or they don't think a move's really going to move the needle, they don't want to make it. And, like, I understand that, but at the same time, if you're re-signing LeBron for 2 years, like, you need to try and win and do whatever you can to win for those 2 years. It's not about 2027. It's about 2025 and 2026, and maybe 2027 if LeBron signs a 3-year deal. But, like, realistically, probably 2025 and 2026. So let's get to a couple more mailbag questions here. One from @George Santiago. What would be your approach in roster or scheme for LeBron being mainly a 4 now, but he can't be expected to do power forward things all the time, like low man responsibility and rebounding?
Well, all right. So if he's going to be the 4 and he can't do 4 things all the time, I mean, like, it is tough
Can't do
because
3
he's
things
40.
all the time either, really.
Right.
Like
So,
the
like, we got to ask
chasing and
ourselves, like, what is he actually doing defensively? That's why you have Anthony Davis, is to make up for the things that LeBron isn't going to do out there as an aging star. But offensively, I really like when they run pick and roll with LeBron setting the screen for Austin, or for, like, it looks the best when it was with Austin, because Austin was very good at hitting him in the short roll with that pass there. And then you have
they have great
LeBron
two-man chemistry.
moving. What's that? Yeah.
Good.
That to me was always, the types of sets that led to the best opportunities down the stretches of games. And then they also inverted that screen too. And I thought that looked good as well. So those kinds of things, I just think the days of LeBron having the ball up at the 3-point line with the defense all zeroed in on him, I think those days are over. His ability to execute in those kinds of situations have passed. So I would like to see a little bit more emphasis on trying to get him the ball at the elbow, trying to get him the ball in the pinch post, and revolving the offense around him that way. Unfortunately, when you do that, that makes things kind of awkward for AD because he isn't a floor spacer. And it puts the onus on the other 3 players on the court to be good enough floor spacers that LeBron can operate with some space there. But I would like to see more LeBron as a screener this upcoming year, because I just thought those opportunities, and I just don't know what an offense does with a LeBron James coming at you up a man already going downhill. There's just very little that defenses can do there, other than hope that he kicks it out and hope that that player misses. And unfortunately, last year Taurean Prince was a terrible corner shooter, and the Lakers seemed to struggle there. But and so that rewarded the defense's gamble. But so long as you're making the defense make that gamble, that's where I think he those kinds of sets, those kinds of principles is where I would start.
So you mentioned the offensive end, so I will focus on the defensive end. I think you have to commit, obviously, or you can have flexibility within your scheme and within your lineups, but like you got to decide, is LeBron going to be more of a 3 next season, or is LeBron going to be more of a 4? And then you have to build out your roster that way. And often when we talk about positions, it's more on the defensive end in terms of who they're matching up with and the types of guys that they're matching up with. So for me, I've come around more to the double big lineup, or the return of the double big lineup based on how last season went. I thought there were really good stretches with Christian Wood next to AD and LeBron, and Jackson Hayes next to AD and LeBron. And that kind of changed my perspective, because I'd been pretty anti that. I wrote one of the few, like, I will occasionally bust out a critical column, and the two I've written in the last like year were, one, saying it made no sense to go back to the 2 big lineups, that especially with the guys that they signed, but like that AD is a 5, he's lost his jumper, and you just, unless you find a unicorn big man that can space the floor and protect the rim, it's going to be hard to kind of make those lineups work. And I would say I was right in that Hayes and Wood were like the good moments, but not at the level that the Lakers needed them to be consistently, especially when AD was off the floor. You could build a lot of good lineups with AD plus those guys, but like they were not at the level to like prop up the Lakers really in like a playoff high level competitive setting without AD. But there were some, like, those lineups look better than they had previously. And I think that's a testament to LeBron and AD, the level that they were at, but also the 5-out offense and some of the changes that the coaching staff made. And so like, I think I'm more open to that. But I also think, like, ideally you find that sort of tweener forward that can play the 3 or the 4, can play quality defense, and can kind of shapeshift sort of in a way where like I look at Austin Reeves, and this isn't the best example, but like Austin Reeves next to D'Lo, it's sort of like whoever's the best guard, like Austin Reeves was going to take that assignment, right? And that was just how it was. And whether it was a point guard or a shooting guard, Austin Reeves was going to be that guy. And I think like the Lakers had that with Rui, but Rui had his limitations, especially as we saw in the Denver series, like chasing a guy like MPJ around screens, tracking him, running him off the 3-point line. Like those were areas that Rui struggled with. And he's a good post defender. And although Jokic had his way, but that's just Jokic had his way with everybody. So like we saw some of the limitations with Rui and him in that specific role. So I think if you could bring in, and these are just looking at some names I've sort of heard, but also looking at some guys that could be available, Kyle Kuzma, Jeremy Grant, Malcolm Brogdon's a guard, so I'm going to put him to the side, but like DeAndre Hunter, those 3 guys, like I think sort of check those boxes in terms of guys who could be primary wing defenders as well as guard up in certain situations, and kind of have that 3.5 positional build. DeAndre Hunter is a little bit smaller than Kuzma and Grant, but like I think you got to commit one way or the other. I feel like the Lakers were sort of floating in between both identities. And again, you can have certain lineups and certain configurations where you put LeBron in different spots, but and then sometimes they just went way too small. Like you got to give him the proper help. So be it like, I think of a guy like Daniel Gafford, of had the Lakers traded for him, go back in the time machine, trade for him. Like he would have been a really good fit as that more traditional 5 rim runner, roller, screener, rim protector. next to LeBron and AD is sort of similar to the JaVale mold. But then if you went and got one of these wing guys, or ideally like a Mikal Bridges, although that's going to cost a lot, like that guy I think is the perfect then like wing to slot around them, and you're maintaining size, length, athleticism, and you have a guy who can provide some versatility. So to me, I think looking at like the defensive end, they have to lean more into an identity. But if it's going to be LeBron at the 4, it can't be Torian at the 3, or like these 3-guard lineups or whatnot. Like you need a proper 6'7" and above wing at the 3, and a guy who's active, long, athletic, and a decent rebounder at a minimum. Or you go bigger and you add a center, you downside, or you slide LeBron down to the 3, and then it's going to be a challenge for him chasing guys on certain nights. But like you kind of live with the trade-off of we're bigger in the paint, we're better defensively in terms of rim protection, rebounding, all that stuff. So I guess that would be the direction I would like. Either one, I'd probably lean more toward getting the wing, but I also think you need that option off the bench in terms of like a big that you can play next to LeBron and AD. So ideally you get both and you could go either direction, but I would probably lean more toward like the big wing. Lakers have really not had that guy since 2021. Kuzma, I would say, was probably the last guy that they met in that mold. And I think it's been a big weak spot on the roster since then.
Yeah, Kuz, I keep on coming back to Kuz, and I know we know that Pelinka likes to bring back old Lakers. He likes to, and we know that Kuz would also like to be a Laker. That's not a very hard secret to find out there, if you do a little bit of digging there. So I really like the idea of bringing back Kuz. I am over the moon about bringing Mikal Bridges in, but every time I ask about that, I get told very, very quickly that the asking price on Bridges is far beyond what the Lakers are capable of offering. Not even willing, but capable of offering. That the Nets just see him as, because they still want to be competitive next year. So the other wing that they have on their team is, I guess, Cam Johnson.
We had a Cam Johnson question, so we could touch on that.
If you want to just dive into that, we can do that.
To at Aussie_Lakers, do you think Cam Johnson would be a good target? I like Cam Johnson. My big issue is he's just never healthy. Yeah. And he's been injured, I want to say, in all 4 years he's been in the league. And maybe that first year in Phoenix, he just wasn't a full-time rotation guy, so that's why his games were low. But in looking at his basketball reference, like he's dealt with injuries. He fits the mold of like 6'9", 6'10", can play the 3 or the 4. I think he looks like a better defender than he actually is.
Yep.
But an elite shooter, always in that like 38 to 42% range, and on high volume and sometimes difficult volume. So like I love his fit offensively. And like I see him as like almost I mean this as a compliment, like a bigger, better Torian in that sense of like I think he can pump and drive. He could attack on the the weak side, and just a high level catch and shoot, spot up threat. But
he's
with
tall,
the injuries and some of the, like, I guess he could be a poor man's like MPJ in like an ideal world, but like that's how the Lakers could kind of functionally use him. But defensively, I don't think he's quite at the level that you want. And like comparing him to Rui, I think he's a better player than Rui, but I don't know if that gap is worth the potential price. And then also factoring in his injury history.
Yeah, the Rui thing is complicated because I would like to be able to send him to Washington for Kuz, but I don't think Washington is interested in Rui, at more money. They traded him away from pennies in the first place. The Johnson thing is tough because of that injury thing, and I just don't quite trust. Like I say this without knowing anywhere near enough about what makes a good training staff or what makes a bad one or anything like that. I just know that the Lakers' history recently with players, they've had a lot of players be out longer than maybe initially thought. You've had some what we would normally consider somewhat trivial injuries, right? Kendrick Nunn missed the entire year with like a bone bruise, and then Gabe Vincent basically did the same thing that the very next year, and so on and so forth. So And we know, by the way, that the Lakers are cognizant of this. They don't like bringing in players who have injury concerns. That's the whole reason that they didn't draft the guy who went to Houston. Why am I blanking on his name?
Cam Whitmore.
Whitmore. That
Yeah,
he
the
was
knee concern.
Yeah, that he was, their scouts liked him, but the Lakers higher ups were like, we can't take somebody who has those kinds of concerns. So, yeah, I would
then
love.
they ended up with a rookie who had back surgery.
Yeah, they had those concerns. Yeah. But yeah, I like Johnson. I just, whoever it is, like the joke that I made on the show that, a week or so back was, don't bring in anybody shorter than 6'5". We're good there. Like you're set. You have plenty of guards. You have plenty of ball handlers. Go out and get two-way wings. And I know those are expensive. Those are the toughest. Those are the role players that every team is looking for. And those teams that have them know that. But I don't care if you have to overpay. You have to walk away from this offseason with a two-way wing that you're confident in on both ends of the court at any time in the game.
Yeah, I still like the Kuzma, Grant. You could, like, those guys are expensive, first of all, in terms of just like literal salary. Although I guess Grant's expensive. I don't
cheaper.
remember what Kuzma's a little cheaper. But I still look at a guy like, to me, the one that got away for the Lakers is Dorian Finney-Smith, and I think, in my opinion, the game that the Nets won in LA, I want to say that was like a late January game, maybe early Feb, but I think it was late January. Dorian Finney-Smith defended, like, he had a bad game, and that was around the trade rumors were going on. And I remember, there was a lot of Laker fans like trolling him because he had a terrible shooting performance, but he defended LeBron as well as I've seen anyone defend LeBron this season, outside of maybe Aaron Gordon, who's just a specimen, and just a 6'10", 250, 260, whatever he is. Like, he's just a beast. But outside of Aaron Gordon, who's like one of the few guys that can physically match, if not even overpower LeBron in certain cases, like Dorian Finney-Smith, I thought that game, if you go back and if you're a sicko, true basketball sicko, go back and watch that game and watch Dorian Finney-Smith's defense against LeBron. It was, in my opinion, as well as I've seen someone defend LeBron, at least last season. So, like, he didn't have, like, he missed a bunch of open shots. And I think that's a concern for the Lakers, given that everyone comes to LA and somehow forgets to shoot. So like, I would not be shocked if they traded for Dorian Finney-Smith and he somehow shot like 32, 33% on threes. But assuming he can at least hold his own at like 35, 36%, I think that the combination of size, he's a legit like 6'7", 6'8". I think a decent rebounder for his size. Like, he competes, he's physical, he's tough. He's a solid 3-point shooter. Like, I just think he checks a lot of the boxes. And no, he's not perfect. He will have those nights where he goes 0 for 6 or whatever. But you're also like, your options are relatively limited. And like, the guys that are at a higher level than him are going to cost, like, there are some, like, go try and get like Josh Hart from the Knicks, or even Dante DiVincenzo from the Knicks, or like Mikal Bridges, like some of these other guys that you would, if we're ranking like 3-and-D guys who would be above Dorian Finney-Smith, they're going to cost at least 2 first-round picks, if not 3. And Dorian Finney-Smith might cost at least 2 first-round picks. So, like, even then, like, he's not cheap. But I think the Lakers need, like, that's the player that they need more so than anything, in my opinion. Like, yes, Donovan Mitchell would be great. Yes, a third star would be nice. But like, if they don't fill that third front court spot with the right guy, be it a high level starting caliber center or a high level starting caliber wing, I think they're just not going to be at the level that they need to be. One more question, and then we will get out of here. I like this one from at Ron Salihu 23. If the Lakers have the full MLE, do you think Kelly Oubre and Derek Jones are realistic options? I think both fit that Danny Green mold, where they shift between the 2 and the 3. Also asked about Jonas Valanciunas. We kind of talked about that. He says on a minimum, I don't see Valanciunas getting, I think he'll get more than that. I think he'll get at least the taxpayer MLE, or the biannual. Yeah. Like, I don't see Valanciunas dropping to minimum level, I think. Because honestly, the other thing here that the Lakers are battling with the big situation, and I'll just make this point quickly, like every team, like seemingly every team in the West needs to load up in the front court. Like Denver
Yeah.
does not have a quality backup center. Phoenix doesn't have a quality backup center. You could also argue a quality starting center.
Yeah.
Like Oklahoma City needs to add size. The Clippers, Tice and Plumlee are both free agents, so they
Golden
could have
State has needed
some
to for a
turnover there.
decade.
Golden State, like, so the Lakers need that, but they're battling basically every other team in the West who's now looking at, Dallas has this Gafford Lively combination now. Minnesota isn't going anywhere with Gobert and Towns and Reed. So like you now, and of course Jokic, even aside from them not having a backup. So like you need a certain level of size in the West. That is evident now, and the Lakers are going to have a lot of competition both on the trade market and in free agency. So a guy like Jonas Valanciunas, like maybe production wise or performance wise, you could argue should be a minimum guy, although I still think he's a little bit better than that. But even so, some team will come in and offer him the biannual taxpayer. So like there's a lot of competition for these bigs. But what do you think of? So I guess what I like about this question is both of these guys were minimum guys. And I think it kind of like goes down the path of, sure, you could sign a Kelly Oubre or Derek Jones Jr. And those guys, maybe they get Bruce Brown where they get a bigger offer than like a cap space team just signs them to a 2-year deal, team option on the second year, and sort of similar to the Bruce Brown contract, because both guys perform well in the playoffs. But like those are also two guys who are out there, and two guys that the Lakers as well as the rest of the league could have had for minimum deals. So I think identifying the next Kelly Oubre and the next Derek Jones Jr. is almost more intriguing to me than potentially signing those guys. Like, get them if you can, and if it makes sense. But I kind of would like to sign the next one of those guys as a minimum guy and identify maybe like athletic defensive minded wings who are maybe underappreciated, but have to have a certain level of motor and a certain level of skill. And that's where like I look at those guys are Cam Reddish. I think there's just a giant gap there in terms of skill and Derek Jones Jr. like became that guy. But what do you think of those two guys as potential non-taxpayer MLE guys? And is there a wing out there that you maybe see as like a vet minimum option that could potentially have a breakout similar to those guys in like either a starting role or a backup role?
First off, I really wish the league would address the issue that teams have with team building here, where like you sign a veteran minimum player and then you immediately lose them if they play well for you. Like I feel like they should almost treat it like a second draft. And that's what a lot of teams consider it a lot of times, is a second draft on a high pedigree player, to where like I wish you could at least get partial bird rights immediately, if not full bird rights on some of these players, so that you can benefit from developing and turning that player's career around after just the 1 year. Because the Lakers lost Malik Monk that way, Denver lost Bruce Brown that way, the Mavericks might lose Derek Jones Jr. that way. I think that's something that the league should really think of. But as far as like actual guys who I could see kind of stepping in there, I'm looking at the list. Man, this year stinks. This year's crop of free agency,
It's a bad list.
It is not great. Like I'm looking at, I'm in the M's, and I scrolled past Derek Jones Jr. Like there just isn't a ton of like, I guess you could maybe say Isaac Okoro, right? If Cleveland decides to just let him walk outright. But I don't think they would do that. Yeah, it's just not a good crop of free agents. So you kind of have to go out and trade for a guy. I almost feel like who is behind like the teams. Like basically what I would like to see the Lakers try doing is going to like in Orlando, or going to in OKC, or one of these teams that like OKC is going to get drafted out. Like they're going to have too many players if they use all of their draft picks and all of that stuff over the years. Can you go out? Can you trade for the guy that they just paid last year, who was on a crazy contract? He has the funny hairdo in the back. Oh gosh. Anyway, but like those kinds of players who have a skill set that they are just stuck behind players at their position. Kendrick Williams is a player who I was
Oh,
thinking of.
yeah. I like Kendrick Williams. Yeah.
Yeah, like those kinds of players where his role on that team is probably gone because of Dort's emergence, because of Kason Wallace's emergence and stuff like that. What would it take to go out and get Williams from OKC? And I think you could do the same. That's basically what the Mavericks did with Gafford. Was, they basically said, all right, well, Gafford's doesn't quite fit their timeline. Let's see what we could give up and see what we can get or what we can give up to go out and get him. And obviously he helped turn their season around. So those are this free agency crop. And it's actually kind of fortunate that the Lakers only have the one tool to upgrade via free agency in this bad free agency class. It's not going to be like 2016 where everybody had way too much money and the Lakers wind up with Luol Deng and Timothy
Deng and
Mozgov.
Mozgov. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not going to be that all over again, but it is, I guess you can maybe say like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not even going to try to convince myself.
I'll get. Hey, I got some names. I'll give you some names. These are some real earth shattering. Can I sell you on Patrick Williams? Can I sell you on Patrick Williams? Now this is not a minimum guy, so I think like this would potentially be like your non-tax. Like I think several things like the market would have to play out in a certain way I mean, he's a restricted free agent. So that's another thing here of like Chicago would basically have to let him, either renounce his rights or not match. But Patrick Williams,
he played better in the second half of last year. Like he was actually pretty good.
He's 6'8". He's got he's got a good frame. He's been shooting the ball better. I think like to me, he's kind of like a 3-and-D guy hiding in plain sight. And I think he's interesting. And then cheaper guys, Najee Marshall and Haywood Highsmith. And now Highsmith, Heat player. I don't know if the Lakers want to dip their toes in that water again.
Right.
It's kind of a toxic water from some toxic Florida water. But
Pat Riley's sitting there hitting every player in the knees as they walk out the door. Just
it's wild. But now, granted, he's not small, so maybe there's like a correlation there with like the small guards, and I don't know. But Najee Marshall, Haywood Highsmith as like both minimum guys, I think are sort of like I'd rather have either one of those guys than Cam Reddish. Lakers again might not have a choice there, but it gets like I mean, my free agency, like Derek Jones Jr., Kelly Oubre. I between the two, I'd prefer Derek Jones because I think he's a better defender. And I think he's also better off the ball. Like Kelly Oubre, I think improved as a cutter in Philly, but still the shot selection. Like I remember that game in LA, and maybe that's coloring my judgment a little bit too much. But like some of the shots, it's been a problem for him really throughout his whole career. But like the shot selection and the inefficiency can sometimes be a problem. Gary Trent, probably not a little too small, not as good defensively, but like might be the best they could, like Royce O'Neal, Caleb Martin, Nicholas Batum, Robert Covington, though it's probably a couple years too late on Covington.
What do you think Gordon Hayward gets?
I would stay away from Gordon Hayward personally, but I could see him getting. It's weird because he had a decent start to the year. And then I would even say a good start to the year. Maybe the taxpayer MLE biennial. I could see him in that mix. I don't see. I mean, maybe some team really convinces themselves that based on the name and the pedigree and whatnot that he's a non-taxpayer MLE guy. But I feel like he's more of like a biannual taxpayer MLE guy.
I wonder if you could basically split the taxpayer mid-level between Hayward and Drummond. Like I kind of wonder if
I want to. I'm going to add a personal addendum to your addendum of you said like no one under 6'5". For me, it's like no one that's not at least like a slightly above average defender for their position, and that's where I have some hesitance with Gordon Hayward. Like I think the Lakers, they already have several guys. Like, I think that was arguably at this point I know in the playoffs there was some shooting issues in terms of like Rui had a rough series, D'Lo had a rough series. The bench outside of Torian didn't give them much, but like I would still say the overall biggest roster issue, in my opinion, was just the lack of plus defenders, and part of that was Vando missed obviously the second half of the year, really most of the year, and then Gabe missed most of the year. But even with all that, like I just didn't think they had enough quality, like one-on-one defenders in the rotation, and I'm for like size and defense, and ideally that player can shoot, although now you're asking for a $20 million a year player.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for me, so that's my one hesitance with Gordon is like, I mean, he's got the injury history. The defense is like, whatever. So that would be my kind of pushback, I guess.
Kyle Anderson's interesting. He's an unrestricted free agent. He made $9 million this last year. He's in that range of the taxpayer mid-level. He can play he's certainly more of a 4 than he is a 3. But the thing that I like about Anderson is he's like just slightly dirty, like just a little too physical. And I honestly think that's an area that the Lakers have really lacked, basically since that 2020 championship year, was that kind of physicality that players are always cognizant of. They had Markieff Morris on that team. They had Dwight Howard on that team. I think at one point they also had JaVale McGee on it. And I think Boogie Cousins was involved with that team at some point too. And it was just, teams just didn't get away with very much when they played against the Lakers with cheap shots and with physicality and stuff like that. And I kind of like the idea of Kyle Anderson stepping in and mixing things up every so often while also being productive.
Yeah, no, I think, and that's, I think that's like a realistic guy that, and I think of course the weakness in his game is his shot that has its own loading screen or loading bar, whatever is the running joke on Twitter, like the shot. But beggars can't be choosers, and the Lakers are relatively limited in the types of ways that they can upgrade the roster, at least in free agency. So like that's a guy that you plug him in, and he does have some concerns, but he's skilled ball handler, and playmaker for his size. As you said, he's got some dirty, like multi-positional defender, solid rebounder. Like I think he checks some of the boxes you want from a bench forward. So yeah, I mean that's what the Lakers are dealing with right now, right? Like it's not the sexiest names, but I think the theme of this episode has been they got to do something. They got to be aggressive. They have to at least use a couple of these picks to upgrade this roster, because as currently constructed, I think it's a good team. I think it's a team that could win a round, maybe even win 2 rounds if everything breaks right. But like once you get to that conference finals level, I don't think this team is quite at that level as currently constructed, even with a better coach. So I think that's it. But
if they get a better coach,
that's if they get a better coach. Well, look, you've been the one saying it throughout the show. Play your best players. I think that is a start. And if they get they hire a coach who will play their best players, that is I think it's progress from last year. So I think they're headed in the right direction theoretically.
Yeah, it's a low bar.
I wasn't going to say that, but I don't disagree. But Anthony, where can the good people watching and listening find your work, and where can they follow you if they want to engage with you and troll you for some of your takes off of today's show?
You can follow me on Twitter at HMFagan. If you want to troll me, you guys are more than welcome to do that there. You can see it at Anthony Irwin LA is where you can find me basically everywhere. I've tried to keep that pretty consistent. The Lakers Lounge, youtube.com/@LakersLounge is where you can subscribe to the show there, and then find it everywhere you get your podcasts, preferably on Odyssey. And then, you pop on the show every so often. I really enjoy doing this here with you. I would imagine your audience and my audience is going to see quite a bit of us here moving forward over the course of the offseason and into the summer.
And make sure you follow Anthony. Make sure you are following him on YouTube, Twitter, everywhere. He does great work. He had a great season. I think you had a breakout season as a reporter. You weren't previously reporting a lot of stuff, but you crushed it this year. So I was very impressed, and it was glad to see that. So be sure to follow Anthony, and I will be back next week for episode 28 of Buha's Block. I will talk to you then.